Of Shiras Devorah is kind of a cynical, mocking tone in which she talks about Sisra's mother, that how much she is waiting for her son, and she's wondering why is it taking so long for him to come back. But then Devorah makes the point that it's not because she misses her son or she's worried about him, but she says, where's all of the spoils of war that he's going to bring back? The nice clothing, the jewelry, etc. Now, the lashon of the pasuk is in Devorah's Shira, "Vatiyabeb Aim Sisra," which is translated, the mother of Sisra was weeping. Now, the minhag of 100 kolos is because the Targum. It's interesting, although Yabeb obviously is a Hebrew word, but it's connected to an Aramaic word because when the Torah describes the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and it says Yom Teruah Yelachem, a day of blowing the shofar, the Targum Onkelos says Yom Yebava, a day of crying, a day of sobbing, a day of weeping, meaning the shofar symbolically is a form of crying. So it turns out that even though it's a different Hebrew word, Rosh Hashanah, the word is Teruah, and for Sisra, it's Vatiyabev, but since the Targum of Teruah is Yebava, the minhag connected the crying of Sisra's mother to the blowing of the shofar, and there is a medrash that says she cried 100 times. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but 100 sobs came out of her, and because of this, we blow 100 kolos. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be totally digressive a little bit, and I want to talk about the 100 kolos of shofar, where that comes from, and how do you get them, and what is the oraisa, what is the rabbanan, what is later minhag that developed. And I guess we're not so far from it being relevant. I mean, Rosh Hashanah is coming up, and in fact, the truth of the matter is, the Svarim tell us one should start thinking of Yomim Noraim already in the month of Tammuz. Tammuz already, you're thinking about the Yom Hadin, Rosh Hashanah. They say Tammuz is an abbreviation, although it's not in order. The Zion, Zaman, Tshuva. So the last letter is Zaman. The first letter is Tshuva, the time of Tshuva. The Mem, Memashmesh, is approaching. And the Vav, Uba, and it's coming. Zaman, Tshuva, Memashmesh, Uba. And certainly for Av, for sure. So to talk about, when Rosh Chodesh Elul comes after the Bein Hazmanim, we're going to blow shofar every day. So it's not totally beyond the pale of reason to talk a little bit about shofar, especially since the whole makor of Mea Kolos is derived from Sisra's mother. So first of all, the Gemara darshans the following. The word Teruah. Now, Teruah is the crying sound of the shofar, right? The crying sound of the shofar appears 3 times in the Torah. 2 times by Rosh Hashanah, where one pasuk in Emor says Yom Teruah, a day of Teruah, a day of crying, Yom Teruah. And then in Parshas Pinchas, we read recently, Zichrain Teruah, a remembrance of Teruah. So the word Teruah appears twice by Rosh Hashanah. And then the 3rd time it appears is by Yovel, the Jubilee year, which is every 50 years. On the Yom Kippur of Yovel, not Rosh Hashanah, on the Yom Kippur of Yovel, the Torah says, V'havartem shofar Teruah. You shall blow a shofar of Teruah, so the slaves go free and the like. Now the Gemara darshans in Maseches Rosh Hashanah that although it's 2 Teruahs by Rosh Hashanah and 1 Teruah by Yovel, but we learn out each one is the same as the other one, which means you need 3 Teruahs on Rosh Hashanah and you need 3 Teruahs on Yovel, meaning the 1 of Yovel gets pulled into Rosh Hashanah and the 2 of Rosh Hashanah gets pulled into Yovel. So stopping there, what the Torah says is you have to blow the Teruah sound 3 times. It says nothing about a tekiah. You have to blow the Teruah sound 3 times on Rosh Hashanah. That's step one. 3 truos. Now, step 2 is another klal. The Gemara says that whenever you blow a trua, you must precede it by a tekiah sound, and you must have a tekiah sound after it. So when it says trua, 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 it actually means tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, because that's a klal that the Gemara derives that every trua has to have a tekiah before and a tekiah afterwards. So, putting all of that together, it would appear that the Torah's requirement of blowing shofar is a total of 9 times. Not 100, 9 times. Tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, 9 times, meaning even though the trua might be 9 sounds, but that counts as 1 sound, the trua, okay? So that's step 1. So the truth of the matter is, in the time of the Mishnah, if you would have walked into a shul, in the time of the Mishnah, you might just hear 9 shofar blowings. Tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, that's it. Now, we then come to the period of Rabbi Avo, who's an Amayra. And what happened was that in Klal Yisrael, there developed a suffix. What was the trua sound? For sure, the trua sound is a crying sound, because the targum of trua is yabava, which is crying. But there were 3 different forms that the crying took. Some say it was a prolonged crying, ay, 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 which would correspond to what we call the shavarim. Others say trua was a whimpering sound, ay, 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 which we call trua. And a third view took the position it was a combination of an elongated sob followed by a whimper, which would mean it's a shvarim trua. Now, different communities did different things. So once again, if you would have walked into a community at a time when this suffix existed, I'll talk about how did the suffix start, you wouldn't hear all of the different sounds. In some shuls, you would hear tekiah, shvarim, trua, tekiah 3 times, and that's all. In other shuls, you would hear tekiah, shvarim, tekiah 3 times, and that's all. And in a third shul, you might hear tekiah, trua, tekiah 3 times, and that's all. Because these are 3 different versions as to what is the trua sound of the Torah. Okay, so it's interesting. Even though we call it shvarim, just to distinguish it, but in point of fact, shvarim is an opinion of what is the trua of the Torah. So, in stage 1, before there was a suffix, I'll get to how the suffix started, you would just hear tekiah, trua, tekiah 3 times, and that's it. Stage 2, you also heard tekiah, trua, tekiah 3 times, and that's it. But there were 3 different versions of what the trua of the Torah was. Some opinions said tekiah, shvarim, trua, tekiah 3 times. Some opinions said tekiah, shvarim, tekiah 3 times. That's it. And the third opinion said tekiah, trua, tekiah 3 times. So you still have 9, right? 9. But what the 9 was would depend on what the minhag was. Now, Rabbi Avo thought that on Rosh Hashanah, he was an Amar already after the Mishnah. It was not appropriate that different Yidden should be doing different things. We should strive for achdus. We should strive for unity. We should strive that we're all on the same page as we ask Hashem for mercy. So Rabbi Avo enacted that every single kehillah has to incorporate every single option. So this is a big leap. So instead of just blowing Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah 3 times, or Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah 3 times, or Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah 3 times, which was the custom before Rabbi Avohu, Rabbi Avohu enacted that every single community must blow 3 of each type, meaning 3 Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiyahs, followed by 3 Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiyahs, followed by 3 Tekiah, Trua, Tekiyahs. So, you've gone, after Rabbi Avohu, you've gone from 9 to 30. Right? So we go from 9 to 30. How do we get 30? Because once again, every tekiah is counted as 1 sound. Every shvarim is counted as 1 sound. Every trua is counted as 1 sound. So when you blow tekiah, shvarim, trua, tekiah 3 times, that's 12. When you blow tekiah, shvarim, tekiah 3 times, that's 9. And when you blow tekiah, trua, tekiah 3 times, that's another 9. So 12, 9, 9 gives you 30. So Rabbi Avohu's takana raised the number of shofar blowings from 9 to 30. Now, Ramban points out that from a pure logical standpoint, that actually is not the right way of counting it. Because you shouldn't count the Shvarim Trua as 2, because you're doing the Shvarim Trua because maybe that is the Trua sound of the Torah. So really, the Ramban says, if you want to be accurate, we should not say we've gone from 9 to 30, but we've gone from 9 to 27, meaning the Shvarim Trua should be counted as 1 sound. Okay, Ramban has a very strong point, but Lamaisa, that's not the way we count it. Lamaisa, the way we count it is we do count Shvarim Trua as 2 sounds, even though it is a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Trua. Okay. So everyone understands so far how you go from 9 to 30, and indeed, when we blow the shofar before Musaf, I'll talk about the Musaf in a moment, that's exactly what we do. Those are the 30 sounds we blow. And you should be familiar, I'm sure many of you are already, with the abbreviations that we employ. We blow 3 tashrat, 3 tashat, 3 tarat. So, what is tashrat? Tekiah, shvarim. The resh stands for teruah, and the final tuf stands for tekiah. Now, why is resh trua? The answer is very simple. You can't use a tuf because trua and tekiah have the same first letter. So as a result, we indicate the trua by the second letter, which is resh. Okay, so be sure you understand this vocabulary. 3 tashrats, 3 tashats, 3 tarats, and that is only after the takana of Rabbi Avohu. Meaning, before the takana of Rabbi Avohu, a shul only did 3 of one of those 3 choices. They did 3 tashrats, or they did 3 tashats, or they did 3 tarats. After the takana of Rabbi Avohu, you do 3 of each kind. And that's how you go from 9 to 30. Although the Ramban correctly writes, technically it should be 27, but we count it as 30. Okay, everyone understands that. Now, Rav Haigon, he was the last of the Gaonim, and many say the greatest of the Gaonim, raises a very fundamental question. We were given the mitzvah of blowing shofar all the way back from Har Sinai. how is it Shaykh that uncertainty developed in what the truest sound of the Torah is? Some people did Trua that way, and some people did Trua that way, and some people did Trua that way. And Rabbi Avo said we have to take into account all of the sfekos. I mean, does that mean, for example, that before Rabbi Avo's time, maybe there were communities that were doing it wrong? Meaning, if Trua was Shvarim Trua, then those who only did Trua or only did Shvarim, they weren't Yaitse, Chas v'Shalom. That means for hundreds of years they weren't Yaitse until Rabbi Avo came along and said you got to combine everything. So Rav Hai Gaon says a very, very interesting chiddush. He says the Torah itself is not makpid. The Torah itself says on Rosh Hashanah, as you plead for mercy, you have to cry out to Hashem via the shofar. And communities were given the freedom to choose these different ways of expressing crying. The sob, the whimper, or the combination of sobbing and whimpering. So yeah, before Rabbi Avo, different communities were doing different things. But it's not the pshat that some were right and some were wrong. All of them were yaitse. Because the Torah allows these different types of crying sounds. The Torah did not legislate that it has to be. Right? In other words, this is a big chiddush. When you learn the Gemara, you get the impression that Hashem meant one thing, and over the course of time, there's uncertainty or disagreement how to fulfill it. And then you get into the question, well, how did that happen? And number two, does it mean that the people who did it wrong weren't Yotzei? But like Rav Hai Gaon, there was never a problem. These different minhagim may have existed even from Moshe Rabbeinu's time already. For whatever reason, people felt a certain surah was more conducive to their kavanah. So the question then becomes, so why did Rabbi Avo have to change that? If there would have been a suffix, I understand Rabbi Avo wants there to eliminate the suffix. If there's no suffix, why change it? So the answer is, as I said, that he felt that the imperative of unity and minimizing machlokas was so important that we should incorporate all of the different minhagim. Okay? So that's how we go from 9 to 30. Now, those are the tekios that we blow before Musaf, right after Kriyas HaTorah and Haftorah. And they go by the term tekios de miyushav, the sitting down, even though we stand up, but they're called the sitting tekios. And the reason why they are the sitting tekios is because me'ikar hadin, they're not connected to a Shmona Esrei. And since they're not connected to a Shmona Esrei, you'd be allowed to sit if you needed to, even though we stand. Now, in addition to the tekios before Musaf, Chazal were misakein that there should be an additional shofar blowing during Musaf itself. This is obviously not required from the Torah. That's obvious. First of all, it's obvious because davening Musaf is not required from the Torah, right? Musaf is not a doraisa tefillah anyway. And even if Musaf would be doraisa, which it's not, the Torah does not say you have to blow during Musaf. But the Chachamim wanted to connect shofar blowing to the Musaf as well. And that's why what we blow during Musaf is called tekios de ma'umad, the standing tekios. Why standing? Because it's in Amida, it's in a Shmona Esrei. Now, the particular place at which the Chachamim enacted that you blow shofar is upon the conclusion of the special brachos of Rosh Hashanah. The Musaf of Rosh Hashanah is a very, very unique Musaf. The Musaf of every other holiday, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov, and even Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur has a long vidoy, but the basic number of brachos in the Musaf of Yom Kippur is only 7 brachos. The first 3 the last three, modim, etc. And then in the middle, there's a bracha about the holiness of the day. Mekadesh HaShabbos, Mekadesh Yisrael Vazmanim, Mekadesh Yisrael V'Yom HaKippurim. Yeah? Rosh Hashanah does not have 7 brachos. Rosh Hashanah has 9 brachos. The first 3, the last 3, and then 3 brachos in the middle. And these are known as Malchios, kingship, Zichronos, remembrance, Shofaros, shofar. So instead of 1 Kedushas Hayom bracha, there are 3 brachos, Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofaros. And all 3 of these brachos follow an identical structural format. They have a poetic pesicha, a poetic beginning of the bracha. For Malchios, it's Oleinu. The Oleinu we say every day is actually the introduction to Malchios and Rosh Hashanah. Ata Zocher for Zichronos, and then Ata Niglesa for Shofaros. So that's a poetic pesicha. After the poetic pesicha, we then recite 10 verses, 10 verses from Torah, Nevi'im, and Kesuvim about the theme of the bracha. So Malchios is the theme of God's kingship. Zichronos, the theme is about God remembers the good deeds of our forefathers. And Shofaros are talking about the shofar as Matan Torah, Techiyas HaMesim, Mashiach. Right? So Psicha, 10 verses. And the 10 verses follow a very specific order. 3 from the Torah, 3 from the Kesuvim, all of the Kesuvim are Tehillim, 3 from the Nevi'im, and the 10th and final verse is from the Torah. So it's a little bit of an unusual order. Torah, Kesuvim, Nevi'im, 10th verse, Torah. And then we have the Chasima, we have the concluding paragraph, which is the bracha. In the case of Malchios, it's Melech al kol haaretz, Mekadesh Yisrael v'yom hazikaron. Malchios, God is the king of the world. Zichronos, Zocher habris, he remembers the covenant. And Shofaros is Shomea kol truas amo Yisrael barachamim, he listens to the shofar sound with mercy. Okay, Malchios, Zichronos, Shofros. So, what Chazal were masakin is, at the end of Birkas Malchios, we blow shofar. At the end of Birkas Zichronos, we blow shofar. At the end of Birkas Shofros, we blow shofar. And collectively, those shofar blowings are called Tikiyos de Me'umad, the standing Tikiyos. And that's why you're told not to talk, because the bracha that was made on the shofar before the first shofar blowing is also going on all of the shofar blowings that you're doing, so you don't want to interrupt. So even though the truth is you're never supposed to talk during Chazar Sashatz. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch has a very, very unusually strong and harsh condemnation of those who talk during Chazar Sashatz. I mean, it seems to be almost excessive. He says, a person who speaks Sichas Chulin during Chazar Sashatz, Gadol avono minaso. His sin is too heavy to bear. I mean, he doesn't use that words for Chilul Shabbos. Gadol avono minaso. So apparently the Shulchan Aruch, already in the time of the Shulchan Aruch, people were talking so much during Chazar Sashatz that there had to be a strong language. In fact, the Rambam actually, the old Yemenite minhag, some Yemenites still do it, is they actually did not have a Chazar Sashatz for Musaf of Shabbos. They just say it's like a Heicha Kedusha. They say the first three brachos, Kedusha, and then they daven the silent Shemona Esrei, and they do not have a Chazaras Hashatz for Musaf on Shabbos. Where does that come from? So it actually comes from the Rambam, but it's not in the Mishnah Torah. When the Rambam was, right, the Rambam, in addition to being the Rambam, was also the Rav of the community in Cairo. And there was a real big problem. Musaf, Chazaras Hashatz of Musaf, people were talking, people were schmoozing, people were leaving. So the Rambam essentially abolished Chazaras Hashatz in order to stop people from talking during Chazaras Hashatz. Right? If you don't have a Chazaras Hashatz, then you're not talking during Chazaras Hashatz. Now, this was the Rambam's private psak. The Rambam does not codify this in the Mishnah Torah itself. This was the Rambam's individual response to a situation that he was facing. But the Teimanim, who had tremendous awe and reverence for the Rambam, they heard about this, and they actually adopted it as their own minhag and the like. So the truth is, you're not supposed to talk during any Chazaras Hashatz. But the Chazaras Hashatz of Rosh Hashanah is extra chamor because you're going to have the Tekiyos de Mimumad and you're not supposed to interrupt. Okay, now, what do you blow at the Tekiyos de Mimumad? Because that's going to affect your counting. There are actually 3 different customs of what you blow. And I'm not going to go into all the lumdus now, but let me first mention what we do, what most Kehilos do today. So the order is a little different. You blow one of each, meaning to say 1 tashrat, 1 tashat, 1 tarat after Malchios. Okay, so it's different than the Miyoshev. In the Miyoshev, you did 3 tashrats, 3 tashats, 3 tarats. In the Me'umad, after Malchios, you do 1 tashrat, 1 tashat, 1 tarat. After Zechronos, 1 tashrat, 1 tashat, 1 tarat. After Shofaros, you do 1, 1, 1. So that actually means, and that's what we do, that's what you're going to hear here, and probably in most of the shows you have gone to or will go to, this is what you will hear, although I'll mention some other minhagim. Now, if you follow that calculation, that actually gives you 60, because it's the same number. It's the exact same number as the Muhammad, although as the Miyoshev, although it's configured a little differently. Okay, so it turns out the Miyoshev gives me 30, and the Miyomad gives me 30. Now again, as far as the Gemara is concerned, we really didn't care about the number because you didn't have to get to 100. I'm just showing you how you eventually will get there. But the Gemara was indifferent to that. The Gemara did not say, oh, we need 100. The Gemara just said we have to have Miyusha for the mitzvah and we have to have Muhammad to connect it to Musaf. Now, that is the most common minhag. Now, within that common minhag, there are 2 variations. Okay, within that common minhag, there are 2 variations. One variation, which is what most places do, is we only blow in the repetition of the Amidah. So that's why you only get 30. However, among Hasidim and among some Sfardim, they actually blow in the silent Shemona Esrei as well, which is a little strange, because what that means would be the following. What that means would be, I mean, obviously everybody in the shul is davening at a different pace. But that means the Baal Tokeya, the one who's going to blow the shofar, is davening next to the Chazan. And when the Chazan in the silent Amidah finishes Malchios, they give a bang, and the Baal Tokeya blows. So even if you're not there, or you're past that, or you're not there yet, you stop, you listen. After Zichronos, same thing. After Shofar, same thing. So according to that, if you have the minhag of blowing even in the silent, so instead of having 30 in the Mu'ummad, you're actually going to have 60 in the Mu'ummad. So when you add it to the 30 of the Miyushav, you already have 90. So the way we do it, when we finish Chazaras Hashatz, we only have 60. but among many Hasidim and Sfardim, they will have 90. Now again, originally that was not important. The number wasn't important. It was just a question of, is the takanas chachamim of blowing in Musaf only apply to the repetition or even to the silent? Those are two different minhagim. Now, it also means that because everybody's davening Shmona Esrei, interesting story, if the Baal Tokeya cannot get the sound out and someone else has to do it, you have to pass the shofar around. Nobody can move. They're davening Shmona Esrei. So Rabbi Dr. Abram Tversky, Zichrono Livracha, actually tells a story. He grew up in a Hasidic home, obviously, in Milwaukee, and their minhag was they would blow the shofar in the silent Shmona Esrei as well, and sometimes the Baal Tokeya had a problem, and the shofar had to be transferred person to person to person to person, and people didn't always know who was blowing the shofar. So he tells the story that when he was 8 years old, somehow he got the shofar, and he blew the shofar, and it was very, very good. And after davening, people wanted to know who was the Baal Tokeya for the shofar. They found out it was an 8-year-old. Unfortunately, nobody's Yotzei. Now, there's no way you could fix that. Baruch Hashem, the Doraisa mitzvah, they were Yotzei with the Tekiyos before Musaf. The problem was they weren't Yotzei the Takanas Chazal to blow during Musaf. Okay, but that's too bad. But you can't fix that because that's a takana to blow during Musaf. If you already davened Musaf, you can't do that anymore. So he mentions that his father's reaction to him was a combination of pride coupled with musar. Like he said, you shouldn't have done that, but he said his father still had like nachas in what his son was able to do. Okay, so as I say, most Ashkenazim only blow mu'umad in the Chazaras Hashatz. Some will blow balachash. Now, let me mention that this is the minhag of, after Malchios, Tashrat, Tashat, Tarat. Tashrat, Tashat, Tarat. Now, there are two other minhagim, which will give you much fewer kolos. One minhag is, you blow one Tashrat after Malchios, one Tashat after Zichronos, and one Tarat after Shofaros. So that actually means, instead of getting 30, you only get 10. And even if you combine that with blowing in the silent, although I don't think there's any combination that combines the minhagim that way, you'll get 20. Now there is yet a third minhag, which matches up the Mu'umad and the Miyushaf. After Malchios, 3 Tashrats. After Zichronos, 3 Tashats. After Shofaros, 3 Tarats, exactly as the Miyushaf. And then you get 30, and if you do it in the silent, you'll get 60. Okay? So I mentioned 3 different minhagim of how the Mu'umad works. The way our Mu'umad works is 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat after Malchios, 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat after Zichronos, 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat after Malchios, and then you have the machlokas, is it even balachash, only b'chazara. Opinion number 2 is Tashrat for Malchios, Tashat for Zichronos, 1. Tarat for Shofaros, which only gives you 10. A third minhag is 3 Tashrats for Malchios, 3 Tashats for Zichronos, 3 Tarats. And actually there is actually a fourth minhag in which all you do is blow Tashrat. 1 Tashrat for Malchios, 1 Tashrat for Zichronos, 1 Tashrat for Shofaros, which only gives you 1. So now this gives you 12. Okay, Tashrat 3 times. Okay, so it's fascinating. You see, there are 4 different minhagim of what you blow during Musaf. And within those minhagim, we have another machlokes. Is it also in the silent or not? Okay. And now, as I say, again, when all of these minhagim were developed, we were not yet concerned with 100 kolos. That was not even an issue. We just wanted to be makayim two things. The mitzvah d'oraisa of tekiyah shofar, and the mitzvah d'rabbanan of connecting the shofar blowing to the Musaf prayers. That was the only concern, right? There was no concern for 100 kolos. Okay. So now, as I mentioned, at a much later time, after the Gemara, in time of the Ga'anim, early Rishonim, there began to be developed a sense that we ought to blow the shofar 100 times on Rosh Hashanah to counteract the 100 sobs of Sisra's mother. Now, let's stop right there. What do you mean, counteract the 100 sobs? I mean, Sisra's mother is long dead. And what exactly are you counteracting by your 100 shofar blowings? The answer is that the cries of Sisra's mother are really symbolic of the mercy that is aroused when a mother expresses her pain to God. And an amazing thing, meaning, something we live through right now, right? There are Palestinian mothers, there are Hamas mothers who lose their children. And they cry, although many of them are like Sisra's mother, like whatever it is. And even the cries of a Russia awaken God's mercy. And God forbid that could be a negative factor against us. So what we have to do is we have to awaken Kav Yachal Hashem's mercy on us by our cries. To say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, look at the Jewish people, don't pay so much attention to the cries of the Rishonim. So we need to counteract because Hashem's rachamim is aroused even for the Rishonim. So we need 100. So now let's look at our situation. So if you follow, let's say, the normal minhag Ashkenaz, like we do here, and this is the standard minhag Ashkenaz. So what have you done? You've done 30 miyushav, and you've done 30 ma'umad. So you need 40. When you finish Chazaras Hashatz, you're 40 short of the 100. So what do? So we break it up. In the middle of Kaddish, right before Tiskabel, we blow 30 in the same order as the Miyushav, 3 Tashrats, 3 Tashats, 3 Tarats. That's 30. And then after Kaddish, we blow a final 10. And that's simple. 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat. That's 10, right? So that's how you do it. So you now have 100 kolos. Now, if you were in a Chassidish minyan, by the time you finished Chazaras Hashatz, you already had 90. 30 of Miyushaf, 30 in the silent, 30 in the repetition. You already have 90. So to get 100, all you got to blow is 10. So instead of, it'll be a much shorter shofar blowing after Chazaras Hashatz, 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat. Okay? And then you're going to have to figure it out with all the other minhagim that I mentioned, meaning to come up with 100. Because how much do you have when you finish Chazaras Hashatz? I remember the first time, obviously I've been going to shul time I was small, but I didn't really pay attention to all the shofar blowing. But I remember my first Rosh Hashanah in Ner Yisrael, a 9th grader, and yeshiva davening is very, very long. As you know, it's very, very long, and Ner Yisrael was longer than we have here, even. So, it was very, very exhausting. Very, especially the night before we didn't sleep. And Erev Rosh Hashanah, Slichos, Slichos was 5:30 in the morning. I think here we're a little more civilized, but it's really very, 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 very hard. So we're davening, and finally Musaf is over, and okay, thank God, and all of a sudden they start blowing shofar again. I didn't fully understand why they're blowing shofar after Musaf. I thought everything was over, and then they start blowing shofar again and again and again and again. So I still remember just what is going on, but now hopefully you understand what's going on a little bit. It is to be mashlim the mea kolos, okay, and the hashlam of the mea kolos is keneged aim sisra, to counteract by tiyabev aim sisra, to counteract the crying that she has. Now, what is it? There are some Sfardim that have a minhag that they blow 101 kolos, so they add one extra tekiah afterwards, because that's the gematria of the angel Michael, who brings our prayers up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, but as I say, the standard minhag is 100. Now, as I say, the 100 is not in the Gemara. It is absolutely not in the Gemara, and it was not even universally accepted. There were many kehilos in the middle. It spread gradually. There were kehilos in the Middle Ages who didn't hear about the 100 kolos thing. But I haven't researched every kehillah. I don't believe there's any kehillah today that doesn't do it. So it's became a minhag that has been nispashet. Okay, so again, nothing to do with Shiras Devorah per se, other than by Tiyave Beim Sisra, but it's good to have a sense of the background of the mitzvah of Tekiyah Shefer. So see you tomorrow.